Thank you all for being here, especially on such cataclysmic weather. Did you survive the Rain-ageddon? Obviously, I think there was a lot more hype about the storm in the media than what it really presented. But the frogs are happy. The frogs are singing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about chytridiomycosis, but in relation to its effect in Belize. And so to give you a background, I'm actually going to kind of cover quite a bit of what has been happening in Belize with amphibians around the country and kind of how it relates globally. And chytrid is a big part of that. And so I apologize if it's not as much chytrid as you want to hear. I know a lot of you probably want to get out there and study that horrible disease, but we'll see how it goes. So a little bit about my background. So I'm a wildlife ecologist, and I've spent the last 10 years studying animals people don't like. I spent 4 years studying giant garter snakes, which are endemic to the Sacramento Valley. I worked with bats in California and Latin America. Again, most people overlook these animals, they don't like them. But it was my work with amphibians that I saw some pretty alarming things happening in Central America, and thus started working for Save the Frogs. Save the Frogs is a nonprofit organization, and we're based in the United States. We work internationally. And I also co-founded a group called Advocates for Snake Preservation, just like saving frogs, except it's saving snakes, because they're another overlooked group of animals that need conservation measures. Okay, so I'm curious, how many of you know where Belize is? Okay, good. That's really good. So we're going to be traveling to the Yucatan Peninsula and right east of Guatemala, and that is the country of Belize. And so to get started, though, we're going to learn a little bit about amphibians as a whole. You all know what frogs are. They're their own group. But they're some of the oldest land vertebrates on the planet, and some of the fossils indicate that they're over 300 million years old. Amphibians have been around for a very, very long time. And they're the only amphibians that go through the only vertebrates that go through the process of metamorphosis. And so when we look at their conservation, this is important to understand because amphibians are linked to water. They need moist, wet environments to survive in. And so any of you UC Davis students should know that the California tiger salamander is kind of a hot topic here because just over in Dixon, there's Jepson Prairie, where they have one of the largest population of California tiger salamanders in the world. And it's great. So you have a nice study area over there. You can work with these animals. I spent about 4 years studying salamander development with UC Davis, and we learned some interesting things. Like a big California tiger salamander that's 8 inches long, they'll lay 800 eggs, one or two at a time at the bottom of a pond. This is what that little salamander embryo looks like. Much different than a reptile or a chicken egg. But after a few weeks, they're going to hatch out and become this salamander larvae. Frogs and toads, we call their young tadpoles polywogs, but for some reason we call salamanders larvae, not as cute as possible. But they're really cool. They have these amazing gills on the side of their head. Tadpoles have them as well, but they're internal gills. But after a while, these salamanders are going to metamorphose and come out on land. Now, not all amphibians go through the process of metamorphosis. Rather, they go through a process called direct development, which basically they start from an egg to a miniature version of adult, and kind of like us, just get bigger and bigger. Many amphibians in Belize go through direct development because they're not necessarily bound by needing an aquatic ecosystem for their habitat to rear their young. So they're able to live in the moist, wet rainforest where they can stay wet all the time and their eggs will hatch fine, the juveniles will develop fine. Okay, so there's about 7,000 species of amphibians around the planet. The diversity is absolutely incredible. And in the last 25 years, scientists have actually discovered 3,000 new species. And we're still discovering new species every day. And because amphibian science is relatively new, and because of globalization, we're traveling to places that we've never traveled to before. And we're really getting to explore this amazing world. And we're finding that there's incredible diversity of amphibians. Now, the frogs and toads are the most common. So, this is an example. It's a Maya mountain frog. It's an endemic species, meaning it only lives in Belize, and it's one of 6,000 different types of frogs and toads. And how many of you guys recognize this little guy? Anyone from California? One? Okay. So this is the newt. This is a very common type of salamander that lives in the Bay Area, Berkeley, San Francisco area. And so the diversity of salamanders is not that incredible, but they're still amazing nonetheless. And the last group that I talk about are the Sicilians, which are an absolutely incredible group of amphibians. They're limbless. Many of them are blind or have no eyes, or just very sensitive light receptive cells that tell the difference between day and night. But they live around the equator, and so they live underground in tropical moist soil, eating small vertebrates or invertebrates. But not much is known about this species because they live around, again, usually around the equator, and also they live in the ground their most of their life. But they are an amphibian. Now, in Belize, we have about 30 species, and I say 38, because that's what is recorded thus far. But we don't know much about them, and the reality is that there's actually more species there, because not much work has been done in Belize to study these animals. And so why Belize? Why am I talking about this one particular country? I've been traveling there since 2008, and literally 6 days ago, I was there for 3 months. So I'm fresh off the plane, and it's cold and wet compared to 80 degrees and nice, warm, sunny temperatures. But that's okay. It's good to be back. But so I've been going there back and forth. We're actually leading eco-tours to Belize, as well as conducting research and a little bit of managing a research station. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I want to talk about why Belize is an important country as a model to study amphibians. Well, one, it's a very small country, but it has a very small population. About 350,000 people live there. There's more people that live in the city of Oakland than there are in Belize. So this is actually pretty important because when there's less people, it means that the forest is, well, quite intact. So in Belize, the rainforest, there's 60% intact rainforest. That means it has not been touched, it has not been logged, it is completely intact, old-growth primary rainforest. And that means who knows what's out there. And it's a great place to study these animals. And the biggest import is ecotourism. And why tourism? Well, it's a beautiful country. It's in the Caribbean Sea. And between the Mayan archaeological sites, the beautiful sandy beaches, or the wildlife, it's a great place for people to go and travel to. So if you want to sign up on the tour, contact me after the show. But like Belize and many other countries around the world, we're seeing a decline in amphibian species. And so this is kind of a global phenomenon that worldwide, about 2,500 species are threatened with extinction. It's about 1/3 of all amphibians are going extinct. It means their populations are declining. A study recently came out that in the United States alone, on red list species that are on the IUCN, that every single year the population is dropping by 11%. This is pretty phenomenal. And so we're going to start seeing more and more declines. In the last few decades, we've seen over 300 species that have actually gone extinct. Scientists compare that rate of extinction to that of the dinosaurs. And so it's a worldwide phenomenon, but the same is happening in Belize as well. But we don't know the full extent of it. And so these are just some of the amphibians that are threatened with extinction, just with their listing of concern. It's already about 1/3 in Belize are threatened. And so why is this happening? But if you've studied any form of conservation or learned about wildlife conservation, you're going to learn it's kind of all the same culprits, right? Habitat destruction, invasive species, over-harvesting, climate change, pollution, infectious diseases. And chytriomycosis is in there. And so all of these are having synergistic effects for amphibians around the globe. And that's why we're seeing so many declines. Now, what's going on with frogs in Belize? And so in 2012, I set out to Belize to kind of answer this question because there was no research coming out of Belize. Mexico was being very well studied, Guatemala as well, even Honduras, Costa Rica, obviously, but not much is known in Belize. And so I wanted to see what was happening so we could kind of create some sort of management plan to see what was happening with the amphibians. Now, again, the likely culprit is habitat destruction. You have a small population, but it's estimated that by 2020, they're supposed to have 1 million people in the country of Belize. With that much expansion, we're going to see much more habitat destruction and forests being degraded. But this is actually kind of an example. So when we're walking through forests, you'll see clear-cutted areas for subsistence farming. And it's trying to find the balance between people and the animals that live in these areas and create sustainable solutions. Because what happens, you go and you clear the forest, you spread pesticides, and it ends up kind of depleting the forest. And so a big problem there in Belize is this habitat destruction. Now, species like this, which is the Chalk's rain frog, it's a little direct developer. It just lives in the primary forests in leaf litter. It depends on this leaf litter to be clean, to be nice and wet. And when people are growing coffee or sugarcane, they're clearing away this forest and they're spreading this pesticides, which is damaging this already vulnerable species. But luckily, in Belize, we have a high level of habitat protection. In the 1980s, a man named Alan Rabinowitz, has anyone heard of him? He started the group Panthera, which works with the world's big cats, working to save these big cats from extinction. And he started with jaguars. And he started with jaguars in Belize. His story is quite incredible, actually, because he had a university professor. He was studying black bears out in the southeast. And one day, a university professor was like, I want you to come with me to go study jaguars in Belize. And no one had ever done this. No one has worked with jaguars at this time, 1980s. But he set out to do it. And he convinced the prime minister of Belize to actually create a corridor in Belize to protect, this area of land to protect this jaguar. And so when you protect this animal, or other big charismatic megafauna, you protect all the little ones that live in its habitat. So what happens now, they're in Belize, there's over 7,000 acres that are protected for this one animal, and that's great because it's going to help the amphibians as well. So high-level habitat protection, very, very good. Now, next, another threat that's happening is pesticides and pollution. So again, this is a threat everywhere, and I'm sure many of you learned a little bit about how pesticides can impact amphibians. But in Belize, we don't have the stringent pesticide requirements maybe here in the United States, and even what happens in the United States is pretty alarming. But basically, almost unregulated pesticide spreading, and so it's kind of scary what happens to be spread on all of the vegetables there. And some of the culprits here, these big agro companies, you can buy this at any supermarket and use it anywhere, wherever you like. And so lots of these pesticides are being put out into the environment. And we've seen deformities as a result. So this is much more studied in the United States, especially California. This is actually a picture from Aptos, California, of a deformed chorus frog. So again, this species right here doesn't look normal, right? Yeah, so this amphibian has 8 legs, and this is a result of an excess amount of pesticides being put out into the environment. Now, what happens though is that when we look at this is a bioindicator. So we look at this animal and we can tell the health of ecosystems based on this animal. And so if the frogs are sick, the frogs are disappearing, it's a sign that the ecosystem as a whole is not doing well. And so when we see these declines all over the world, it's kind of a sign that the ecosystem isn't doing well. The entire world isn't doing very well. So that's why it's so important to have these animals. So you were all expecting chytrid. So I want to talk a little bit about the chytrid fungus and its relation to Belize and around the world. And so the chytridiomycosis has actually been described as one of the worst diseases in history because of its virulent spread around the world, how it spreads, and how it impacts these animals. And in short, many of these species right here, these come from Panama. And so in 2008, I was working in Panama to study this one particular frog, its behavior. While I was there, I got to travel somewhere called the El Valle Amphibian Conservation Center. And it literally was an ark. And it was set up in this little valley in a cloud forest. And it was basically, their whole mission was to collect all the amphibians in these forests, bring them back into captivity, cure them of the chytrid fungus, and then hopefully captive breed them. And it's a good thing they did, because what happened is when they went out and collected these amphibians, shortly after, many of these species became extinct from the chytrid fungus. And so these are all animals that are now extinct in the wild. This one right here is a Panamanian golden frog. It's actually, you can see it in most zoos now because it's actually doing quite well in captivity, but we may not be able to release it. So a little bit of backstory about the extent of chytrid fungus. Chytridiomycosis, again, I talked about being this horrible disease, but it was first studied in the 1980s, late 1980s in Costa Rica with this famous toad right here, Bufo peregrines, or actually they changed its name even though it's extinct, but it's the golden toad of Costa Rica. A big, beautiful golden toad. They would amass together in the thousands, congregating in these mass breeding movement, moments. And this is in the high elevation forest of Monteverde. If anyone's been to Costa Rica, Monteverde, it's a great place to see amphibians, but unfortunately we can't see these. And one particular scientist was going back to her study site, and she was finding that each year the populations was dropping dramatically from thousands to hundreds to dozens to there's no more frogs, no more toads. And she went to a World Congress meeting of herpetology to meet with other scientists, and everyone's exchanging their research. And what her story was the same of what was happening in Africa, what was happening in Australia, and all about the same time. And then it was just this mass extinction. And it was a mystery up until we discovered that it was from this fungus. Now, the chytrid fungus, we still don't know where it's come from. Studies, it's a mystery. They originally thought it came from Africa with a little frog called the African clawed frog, which is a very common pet store frog, but also used for studying pregnancy tests, actually, for women. So that little frog is what helped us create the pregnancy test, which is quite incredible. So, but that little frog was shipped all over the world to be used in labs. And so that's what the culprit was. We thought it was this frog, but apparently it's not, because in the part of the area of the world where the frog is from, there's still chytrid there, and the amphibians are still being affected. So now there's an out of Japan theory, because this fungus is a cold-loving fungus. It does great about 14 degrees centigrade, and so that's why it's only impacting areas where it's rather cold. So in cloud forests or in the mountains. Another species in California is the California mountain yellow leg frog, which is extirpated from 90% of its historic home range. A good deal is because of chytrid, so high mountain amphibians. So this cold-loving little fungus, what it does is it's actually not very bad for the tadpole. What happens is it's aquatic, so it lives in the aquatic, and when the zoospores go out into the water, they're just swimming around looking for tadpoles to attach to. And they actually only feed on keratin, or frog teeth. So frog teeth is the same thing that tadpole teeth. The same thing our fingernails are made out of. And that's the only thing. Not much harm comes to the actual amphibian until it metamorphoses. And so when that little tadpole metamorphoses into a frog, the fungus spores and coats the frog. And it's a kind of a form of suffocation, because amphibians do drink and breathe through their skin. And so it coats the frog, and they become weak, and then they die. Now, the thing is that it just completely affects an area where the amphibians live, and all these spores spread, and you have mass die-offs because of it. And it's highly mobile, so anywhere the water goes, the fungus goes. And so that's why it's spread all over the world. Because scientists, when they were first studying this, traveling throughout Central America, Panama, trying to understand this, they didn't realize that on the end of their boots, on their truck tires, they were carrying this fungus with them. And what happened was the frog biologists, to an extent, helped spread this. But it also is spread through the trade of amphibians in general. And so if anyone eats frog legs, no, it's not too popular. But in some parts of the world it is. And actually the United States imports 15 million frogs into the country every single year to eat them. And they're bullfrogs. They're big, meaty frogs. And they're importing them from frog farms. And so these frog farms, they're in China, Brazil, Taiwan, giant ponds where there's thousands and thousands of these frogs. And in such crowded conditions, obviously disease spread, and the chytrid fungus is one of them, among many other diseases. And these frogs are shipped alive all over the world. And what happens is, if that frog gets out into an ecosystem, it spreads the disease. Or even if the water that the frog is contained in gets released out of the ecosystem, it spreads this disease. And scientists have traced the spread of chytrid with this trade of amphibians. And so we have seen this worldwide spread, a lot due to the eating of frogs. So, but what happened though is, in the 1980s, it spread through Panama right when I was there in 2008. This is where I was studying, and that's where El Valle is. And luckily, scientists went out and collected those amphibians, and they saved them from extinction. But with the eventual goal, and this is what many scientists hope to do with these ex situ breeding activities, is to take those amphibians, breed them in captivity, and then release them. But if any of you wants to work with this disease, we need to figure out one question. How do we inoculate a forest? How do we cure a forest of this disease? Because chytrid will stay in that ecosystem. It can remain dormant for years upon years. And so until we figure out a way to have these amphibians live out in the wild with the fungus, we cannot ever release them back out in the wild. So they're functionally extinct species. Okay. And many diseases have still yet to be identified. So we have a certain amount of animals that come out of the wild. We cure them of fungus, but then they have some other new disease. We don't know what it is. And if you only have like 12 of the last frog from a particular area, and then they start dropping off because of an unknown disease, it's obviously a big problem for its conservation. And so urging people to understand amphibian diseases and getting more interested in the subject, because it is a very new science. So if you're interested in that work, please get into it. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what Save the Frogs is doing in Belize. Because again, there's not much known about the amphibians of Belize. But one is public education and awareness, because most people don't realize that amphibians are going extinct. And actually many people around the world don't realize. And so giving presentations to academics, to universities, to schools, just anyone that's interested, And so thus spreading the word that what's happening with amphibians. And so also working to inspire the next generation to care about amphibians and wildlife. There is a culture of environmental stewardship in Belize that's actually kind of rare in Latin America, and it's great because there's already this appreciation for the forest, appreciation for the reef. Belize is on the second largest barrier reef on the planet, and so getting them interested in amphibians and helping them grow up with this sensitivity to these animals. We've done a lot of work with local NGOs and communities because one barrier to conservation is if the community is not interested in what you're trying to save, there's no way you'll save it. And so that's very important work, is to work with these communities, work with local organizations to get them, whether it's monitoring amphibians or getting the community involved to learn more about them. This is what we've been doing. And also protecting the forest. So there's already so much of Belize that is protected, but protecting more as much as possible. Because with that exponential population growth, we're going to see some, rapid decline of the forest. And so protecting is very, very big. And then, again, creating this system of environmental stewardship. There's actually not a recycling program in Belize. So when you're getting a bottle of water, something you'll use for 15 minutes, it's going to stay on this planet for 450 years. Most people don't know that. They don't understand why that's an issue. But you start seeing things like this happen. And this is on in a town in Punta Gorda. Has anyone been to Belize, actually? Oh, that's cool. Okay, so some of you may know where I'm talking about. This is on the way to a beach near Punta Gorda, and this is the dump. So this is where the dump is, and the trash is burned, and then part of the rainforest is burned, and obviously it's not a sustainable system. And so we need more leaders to go and change this. Develop recycling programs, and furthering this idea of environmental stewardship. And then preaching the idea of individual action and how important it is, because many people, they don't have that connection to the forest. While there is a little bit, it's just not enough, just dropping trash and things like that. And so making conservation a habit is becoming a trend in Belize. And so we're trying to further this as much as possible. And so part of the field work that I'm still trying to get going, it's been about 2 years now, is that there's an area called the Maya Mountains, and it's in a pretty much endemic mountain range in Belize, in southern Belize, and it's isolated for the most part. And so there's been very little research done there, especially with amphibians. But the little research that has been done has been looking at pesticides, and they found that, for example, glyphosate has been found at the top of these mountains. This is hundreds of miles from any farm. But they discovered that because of orographic agrochemical drift, I love that word, basically, when we spray pesticides from a crop duster, it gets swept up into the wind, it gets carried by clouds, it rains, and it pours on these mountains when it finally hits the mountains. And so we're finding alarming levels of pesticides in these what were thought to be protected areas. And so we're having to come up with management decisions for this because it's having impact on the amphibians there. Well, so we're trying to do more research out there with this, with the pesticides. Also, we're conducting research to look at the prevalence of chytrid. There's another area that I was managing a research station along the Hummingbird Highway, which is in central Belize, and we've been taking chytrid samples on all the amphibians there. So far, there have been no, basically there's been samples taken, but there's been no research or no analysis of these samples. So if anyone has a connection to look at samples of chytrid, please send me an email, contact me, because we're still looking for low-cost sampling methods, because anywhere in Latin America, it's very expensive. So we're trying to find a method to get these samples tested. And then we're also trying to discover new species. It's estimated actually there's probably about 60 species in Belize, but they're unknown to science or they have not been documented yet in Belize. And so we're going way out into the bush, having a good time. And if anyone's interested in this kind of work, I could talk your ear off about it and hopefully help you get involved. We're looking for volunteers to go out in these remote areas as well to conduct this work. It's very expensive to have these 3-week-long expeditions. But if you're interested in the work of chytrid, this is part of the process to study this disease, is getting the samples. I mean, who doesn't like to get waist deep in a tropical swamp with snakes and jaguars? It's a really good time, I swear. No, it is. Okay, so I want to talk to you guys about how you guys can help. So there's a little bit I'd like to tell you guys about, but pretty much this idea of we need to reduce our environmental impact, and college students, university students, you hear this all the time, reduce, reuse, recycle. But this is to reduce our ecological footprint is one of the easiest ways we can help amphibians, not just in Belize, but around the world. It helps all wildlife, helps the planet. And so in Belize, it's great because there's a lot of these wonderful little signs about promoting this. And so I love this one in a place called Placencia, show your love for the sea and the green, no throw trash, keep the scene clean. It's like, yeah, it's awesome to be out in this country and see these great things like this. But we need to promote this as much as possible. And then you're all here working to become hopefully veterinarians or work in this field of disease ecology, studying wildlife diseases. So pursue that to the full extent possible and give back. So teach others about what you're trying to do. If you have siblings or you're out on a hike and you see some kids, tell them about the environment, tell them about what you're doing, and spread that knowledge down. Sometimes in the academic community, what is produced stays in the academic community. It doesn't get out into the general public. And so that's a very big disconnection because the public is becoming less and less involved with nature. It's kind of scary to even say this, but like iPhones and technology and, rah, 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 old man statements, but those are having a huge impact. They've studied this, that the more people are into the virtual world, the less they get out into the real world. And this greatly impedes conservation efforts around the world. And so we need people to care. So share what you're learning with the next generation. And please spread the word as much as possible. Back there I have lots of stickers and flyers. I unfortunately don't have as much as I normally do, but a little ran out basically. So help spread the word, visit our website, and if you'd like to get involved, please send me an email. But I still want to talk a little bit about what Save the Frogs is doing. Did anyone see my talk here last year? Okay, a few people. So it'll be a little bit of review for you guys. But for everyone that's not aware of Save the Frogs, what we're trying to do is protect amphibians from going extinct to promote a society that respects and appreciates nature and wildlife. And there's a few ways that we do that. And it's one is we make the amphibian extinction crisis common knowledge. Did everyone know that frogs were going extinct? So almost, a good amount. But it's still, even in academic environments, people don't really realize the full extent of what's happening with these amphibians. And so that's a huge issue. So we're trying to make this common knowledge. So we conduct and we also fund scientific research. So if anyone is interested in working with amphibians, especially studying amphibians, please let us know, because if we have the money or we don't have the money, we might be able to point you out to some resources that can help fund your research, specifically working with chytridiomycosis. I am not an expert in the field of chytridiomycosis, but the executive director, Dr. Kerry Krieger, he did his PhD on chytridiomycosis in Australia, and so I'd be happy to answer some questions for you if you have any further. But what we do also is provide grants, scholarships to anyone that's working, again, in the field of amphibian conservation or research. And we also lobby for necessary environmental protections. We speak up for amphibians. We're the voice of the frogs. They have a beautiful singing voice, but they can't go to the voting booth, when someone doesn't like where they live or whatever. So we try to stand up for frogs, and there's a few ways that we do that. And one, we make some noise. So when 2010, the California California Fish and Game Commission, they sent out a public comment period about should we list the California tiger salamander as a state endangered amphibian. They're on the fence about it, so they always take a public comment period. And so we had over nearly 500 letters sent to them saying, yes, this is important, from people that were concerned about the plight of the amphibian. Now it's a state listed amphibian, and it will have much more protection rather than from before. Did similar for the mountain yellow-legged frog. Again, extirpated from 90% of its historic home range due to invasive trout, the chytrid fungus, global warming, and pesticides. This is a sad, sad story for this poor little frog. And so it needs much more protection. And so we're working to, we've brought this frog's plight to the public and had many letters for its support sent out. And internationally, we actually saved the Hochstetter frog and the Archie's frog from near extinction. This poor little amphibian was critically endangered in New Zealand, and where some of the last areas where this frog had a nice stronghold, these species, they were going to mine the area. And obviously mining is not conducive for amphibians, and so we had 1,200 letters sent to the New Zealand government, and it stopped the mining project. So a very, very simple thing that helped frogs. And we're working to ban harmful pesticides. I imagine if anyone has studied pesticides at all, you may have heard about atrazine. which is quite a scary chemical. It's produced by the group Syngenta. We use about 80 million pounds of it in the United States, and mostly on dry crops, corn, soy, along the Midwest. And they found that scientists, anyone heard of Dr. Tyrone Hayes out of UC Berkeley? Okay, a few, yeah. Amazing amphibian biologist, and he studied some great things about his pesticides. But he found that in the legal limit that's allowed by the federal EPA, so this is our federal EPA, they're taking care of us, they're managing our water, saying that this water is safe to drink. In the legal limit, if you put a frog in that, it'll change from male to female. That's pretty alarming. And so we've had a long-standing fight with the federal EPA and Syngenta trying to ban this pesticide. And so it's banned in Europe. Actually, it's created in Europe, but it's banned there since 2004. And it's about time the United States followed suit. Now, we're lucky that we can even put up a fight in this country for it, even though it's a tough one. But places like Belize or West Africa and Ghana, where I've spent a lot of time working, there's just no question. It's just used and used and used and getting out into the ecosystem. And we're seeing some results of it. So we're working to ban that. Trying to make the pet trade frog friendly. Like how the trade of amphibians for food spreads disease, so does the amphibian trade. There's no disease regulation in the pet trade. Many people don't really understand how to take care of amphibians, and so we're trying to promote responsible herp keeping, reptile amphibian keeping. Trying to stop dissections as much as possible. It's millions of frogs are taken out of the wild or are farmed for use in dissections. So again, contributing to the spread of diseases for something that's rather unethical, which you can do online on a program. And then a success is that with one letter we sent to Wegmans, which, does anyone know Wegmans? Yeah, a few. You've said where you're from in the United States. It's a group of supermarkets, and we sent one letter to basically their corporate office about the plight of amphibians and how the frog leg trade, or the trade of amphibians, spread disease and species, and then they stopped carrying it in their store. So it's 76 supermarkets, huge supermarkets that are no longer carrying these frog legs. So we're trying to stop this trade. We're working to remove invasive species and restore natural ecosystems as much as possible. This is a photo from Chinatown, how these frogs are being kept. If you've ever gone to Chinatown and gone into these just little meat shops or just any of these little markets, you'll see a big tub of frogs. And these frogs could be from China, they could be from Brazil, but they're huddled together, covered in diseases. And so this is a problem. And there are many do-gooders that see frogs in conditions like this, they pick them up, and then they go release them out in the ecosystem. And if they're not spreading diseases, they're spreading invasive species, which the bullfrog is one of the worst invasive species on the planet. An example, a bullfrog gets to be about the size of a football. They're quite large. They're from the eastern United States, but they're not from California, obviously, but they're widespread throughout the country.